Usually goes one of three ways. Whenever I am called upon, be it at a party or on an airplane, to explain to a stranger that I am a minister, I find that there are typically three very predictable reactions. The first is for a person to air to me every last grievance they have ever had against organized religion. The second is for a person to want to debate at length whatever theological differences might exist between us. Now, just these first two responses are no doubt the reason why a few years ago, one of my colleagues confessed that when she flies or is otherwise confined with strangers who ask what she does for a living, she summons up every ounce of bubbly enthusiasm she has and tells them that she is a regional sales rep for a company that makes leather dog chew toys. And then she asks pryingly if they have a dog. Strangely enough, everyone tells her no. Though I have not resorted to using this fib myself, she swears it is guaranteed to shut down any and all awkward conversation. More often than not these days, though, I find it is the stranger who is the one most likely to close down the conversation if and when the topic turns to religion. The third and most common response I get when telling a stranger that I am a minister is for that person, in a defiant or in a sheepish way, to explain to me that they are spiritual but not religious. In whatever way the trope is delivered, it is clearly intended to move the conversation to some safer ground or to bring it to a close altogether. That'll be enough of that. Thank you very much. End of discussion. I suspect at least a few of you have had this experience too, even without telling someone you're a minister. To bring up religion, to mention that you attend Sunday services or that you belong to a Unitarian community, is a highly countercultural act in our very secular city, arguably one of the most secularized places on this side of the planet. Sometimes it's just the path of least resistance to say, I'm spiritual but not religious. I know I've said it myself before, at least before becoming a minister. It's pretty hard to deny being religious when you are an ordained clergy person. But what does it mean when someone uses that phrase? What is it exactly that people are really trying to get at? For starters, it seems there's always some pain wrapped up in the reason somewhere. There's a story just waiting to be told. Very often, the people who describe themselves as decidedly non-religious do so because their previous experience of religion has involved emotional, physical, spiritual, or appallingly even sexual abuse. These wounds can run deep, whether they be the result of dogma, deceit, or outright harm. In our time, the term religion has become a very wounded word. And the real tragedy is that the wounds have been mostly self-inflicted, and too often by those entrusted with authority and responsibility to care for those in their charge. So it's no surprise that so many people describe themselves as non-religious. There are days when I am so angry or embarrassed by the horrors done in the name of religion that I want to join them. It's no surprise, too, that people turn to the term spiritual instead. It's not nearly as loaded. It's not so heavy laden. It sounds nice and nurturing. It sounds enlightened. It sounds tidy and, more often than not, suggests a solo journey free of institutions and, most importantly, free of other people and all of their problems. Indeed, it seems that part of the appeal of the modern spiritual quest is that it's something an individual so often takes up alone. Sure, there can be teachers and gurus along the way and books to guide one on the journey. But so often when people speak of spirituality, they're speaking of something they're ultimately doing by themselves. But if spirituality is about anything, It is the quest for connection. Spirituality speaks to that restless longing in the human heart for an ever deepening connection with the great force of life that is within us and between us and beyond us. And so therein lies the rub for me. In anyone trying to be spiritual alone, in anyone trying to be spiritual all by themselves. I just don't believe it's possible. The spiritual quest invariably involves other people. This doesn't mean, of course, that we can't find powerful connection when we are alone with our thoughts or when we glimpse the grandeur of the earth and are left speechless by its beauty. These are important and essential to our spiritual development, but they are not enough. The thing is that most of us don't live alone on mountaintops, and we were never really meant to. As Richard Gilbert puts it, the spiritual path is not a solitary journey up the mountainside, but more like Chaucer's merry band of pilgrims making their way to Canterbury, telling the tales of their lives along the way. We are social creatures, and we need one another. When we mourn and require comfort, when we are in trouble and afraid, when we are in despair and temptation and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we know that we cannot accomplish some great purpose on our own. When we wish to share our triumphs and win in the face of defeat, we need encouragement to carry on. And we need one another at the end when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. Being awake to these needs and these turning points in our lives and in the lives of others is the work of being human, and it is at its best the real work of religion. The word religion comes from the Latin term religare. It shares the same root from which we get the word ligament. Religare means then to bind back, to bind together. And so when people tell me that they are not religious, I wonder and I worry whether they have found a way to create a community to hold them in their times of trial, to hold them accountable to their values and their dreams, to call them to live with purpose and into the promise of their being. It saddens me to say that it often seems that they haven't. It's not as easy as it would seem to replicate the role of religion in our lives without religion. While family and friends can pick up some of the slack, while yoga classes and the spiritual book aisle at Indigo can certainly help, it doesn't seem that an ad hoc do-it-yourself spirituality is all that sustaining or ultimately sustainable without a community. We need others to bear witness to our lives and we to theirs. We need others to challenge us, to help us grow, and to call us back to our highest purpose, to question our assumptions and lovingly cover our ignorance, to call us beyond a self-centered existence that would have us regularly attending what some have called the church of me, that very seductive place where we only hear and do what we want and are free from anything that might offend or irritate or cause us to question ourselves and our most cherished beliefs. While such a place might be free from friction, it is also without much life. And it leads, I believe, to spirituality being just another form of narcissism. The truth is, we need others to help rub down our roughest edges, and that is not something we can do so well on our own. We can affirm all day long an abstract belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But where the spiritual rubber hits the religious road is when we have to deal with someone who puts that belief to the test. We are, after all, each other's spiritual practice on this planet. And that's what makes religious community so vitally important. We are a community of practice, a group of imperfect people coming together to build up our character and to grow ourselves a soul. I often think of congregations as rock tumblers, where with persistence we who belong to them eventually come out as polished stones, where by turning, we come round right. We need one another if we are to shine. It's not easy, though. To be a part of a religion, to be a part of a congregation, even of the most kindred of souls, is not for the faint of heart. There's a story told of Rabbi Bloom, who was conducting his very first service at one of London's oldest synagogues. All was going well until they got to the Shema prayer, and half the congregation suddenly stood up. Those who were still seated started yelling, "Sit down," to those who were standing. And those standing started yelling, "Stand up," to those still seated. Although the rabbi was knowledgeable about much of the law, he had no idea what to do in the moment. He thought to himself that this behavior must have something to do with this particular synagogue's tradition. And so after the service, Rabbi Bloom consulted Hannah, the synagogue's oldest member. "I need to know, Hannah, what's the synagogue's tradition when it comes to the Shema? Is the tradition to stand during this prayer?" Hannah replied, "No, that's not the tradition." "So the tradition is to sit during the Shema?" asked the rabbi. "No," Hannah said, "that's not the tradition either." But the rabbi said, "The congregation argues all the time. They yell at each other about whether they should sit or stand." And then Hannah interrupted him. "And now you understand. That's the tradition." Alongside all of their wonderful qualities, congregations, the place where religion is practiced in proximity to others, even when it's done online via Zoom in these strange times, also come with a good deal of conflict, upset, and anger. We disappoint one another, feelings are hurt, and toes are stepped on. Again, it's no wonder people would rather be spiritual than religious. It is a lot easier, but it is not nearly as transformative. Because in religious community, we practice together what it means to be human. And we are called to practice at it until we get better at it. This means learning more than we may ever have wanted to know about patience and compassion, forgiveness and humility, about not always getting our way, but growing through pain and frustration rather than running away from it. Now, I suppose one could sit on a mountain peak and think deeply on these things and hope for some illumination, but wading into these difficult waters with others is the only sure path I know to genuine spiritual growth. And the best part is that there is no need to run off to the far corners of the world seeking such enlightenment when there's already so much to work with through the people who are already in our lives, be it those we live or work with, our neighbors or complete strangers, or our fellow members of this congregation. I love how theologian Ronald Rolheiser gets at it. There is this idea that spirituality is somehow exotic, esoteric, and not something that issues forth from the bread and butter of ordinary life. Thus, for many people, the term spirituality conjures up images of something paranormal, mystical, churchy, holy, pious, otherworldly, new age, something on the fringes, and something optional. Rarely is spirituality understood as referring to something vital and non-negotiable lying at the heart of our lives. And rarely, I would add, is religion understood as the place in our lives where we are guided and goaded by the wisdom and inspiration of others to put that spirituality to the test by putting it into practice. So it is right and good that we gather often, and even virtually in these days, into this little loving laboratory of the human spirit, to look at our lives as we live them, to be reminded once again that the spiritual path leads not to isolation, but into the very heart of recognizing our shared humanity. To see that the spiritual quest for connection must be tried and tested in the crucible of human community. The notion of being spiritual but not religious represents a false choice. It is not a matter of choosing one over the other. It is about seeing them both as absolutely essential to each other and to us and to our well-being. If spirituality is our yearning for deep connection, religion is the best way I know to make those connections real. So may we, as a community, be ever dedicated to this quest, to this practice. May we be gentle with ourselves and each other as we learn the hard lessons that life together has to teach. And may we undertake this work, both spiritual and religious, with open and happy hearts, because if we cannot learn to dwell together in peace, what hope is there for our world? Blessed be.